Hey everyone, it's Wobby back for another edition of the Pick Six. This is a busy time of the year in the NFL calendar. The draft is coming up, we're all getting ready for it, but free agency kicks off this week. So, a lot of issues for us to tackle. Let's get to it. Question number one comes from Tim in Pensacola, Florida. Which one player should the Vikings focus on re-signing due to the difficulty in finding a suitable replacement? Well, Tim, I think when you look at the players scheduled to be free agents for the Minnesota Vikings, there's four who were very productive in 2018. Anthony Barr, Sheldon Richardson, Dan Bailey, and Latavius Murray. Obviously, the Vikings would love to have all of them back in the mix for 2019, but I don't think you can understate the importance Anthony Barr has had in this Vikings defense since he was a first-round pick in 2014. It might be expensive, but it'd be great to have Anthony Barr back in the fold. Here's the good news. The Vikings have some depth and some talent on this roster to help insulate them from the blow of losing any of these guys in free agency. It's always good to have some depth. Question number two comes from Harold in Des Moines. I understand losing players like Sendejo and Remmers is part of the business side of the game, but those are still vacancies on the roster now, so what's the plan for filling those spots? Yeah, losing productive, experienced players is a tough part of the business, but the Vikings had to make those moves this week. At safety, let's look at Anthony Harris as a possible replacement for Sendejo. Harris had 9 starts and was productive for the Vikings last season, filling in for Sendejo when he was injured. Along the offensive line, a handful of guys already on the roster who will be candidates to step up for Mike Remmers, including Danny Isadora and Avion Collins, plus we'll have the draft and free agency to help fill that void. Question number 3 comes from Joseph. What can we do about getting a good third wide receiver? Well, Joseph, this is going to be a true position battle to watch during the offseason. The wide receiver position and depth chart after Thielen and Diggs. Aldrick Robinson had some good contributions last year. He could be brought back. Of course, Laquan Treadwell will be on the roster, and he's a candidate. Maybe Chad Beebe, and then of course draft picks and free agents. This will be a fun one to watch in the spring and summer as the Vikings get ready for 2019. The next question comes from Matt. Besides the need on the offensive line, what position could the Vikings address to find a starter for week 1 of the 2019 season? Well, we're going to have to watch free agency before the draft when it comes to this question. That's going to dictate what happens for the Vikings when they make a pick at number 18. Here's a sneaky one though. How about a punt and or kickoff returner? That's a starting position on the football team. The Vikings might be looking for one of those with Marcus Sherrill scheduled to be a free agent and Mike Hughes coming back from an injury. Last note on this question though, don't get caught up on who's in the starting lineup. Think about guys like Mac Alexander, Ben Gedeon, and J-Ron Kearse. Those 3 guys played a lot of snaps for the Vikings in 2018, but none of them were technically starters. The next question comes from Victor in Hyattsville, Maryland. Let's assume that when my Vikings pick at number 18, there is a defensive tackle and an offensive lineman with the same grade. Who do you think they will select? 2 considerations here to answer this question. Number 1, what did the Vikings do in free agency? If they go out and get a starting caliber offensive lineman, then the answer to this dilemma could be the defensive tackle. Also, what's the depth behind each position when it comes to the draft? If the Vikings are at number 18 and they're looking at both positions, and their board says there's lots of depth along the offensive line, the Vikings could go with a defensive tackle at 18 and rely on that depth at number 50 to address the offensive line. Our final question comes from Jeff in Sacramento, California. If you were going to draft a position to counter a strength in the opposing NFC North teams, what position would you be looking at? Interesting question. We take a look around the NFC North, and you know what I like? I know there's lots of good quarterbacks and offenses in our division, but I think the NFC North is chock full of really good defensive linemen, especially defensive tackles. Green Bay has Mike Daniels, who's one of the best in the game. So does Chicago. They have a really good one in Akeem Hicks. Damon Snacks Harrison and Ashawn Robinson are in Detroit, so I think the answer to this question is offensive line. If you can find quality guards and tackles, you might want to pounce on them if you're playing 2 games every season against the NFC North. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Pick Six. It's going to be a busy week, which means you're probably going to have more questions next week. Please continue to submit them to the email address at the bottom of the screen. In the meantime, stay tuned to Vikings.com and stay up to date on your favorite team as free agency kicks off on Wednesday.